Yes, Mr. Kinnear, you have another witness for us.
Afternoon, sir. Yes, I do. May I call Amanda Johnson?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Johnson.
Good afternoon.
I understand you'd like to take the oath.
Yes, please.
Have you got the testament there?
Yes.
Take it in your right hand, please, and read the words on the screen.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Sit down and make yourself comfortable. All right, there's some water there if you need it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Clear, when you're ready.
Thanks, sir. First of all, would you mind confirming your name for the record?
Amanda Johnson.
Ms. Johnson, thank you very much for coming to give evidence today. It's much appreciated. Now, if at any time you have any difficulty understanding the question I've asked, please say so, and I'll either repeat it or rephrase it. Secondly, if at any stage you'd like a break, please don't hesitate to say so. Thirdly, if you could keep your voice up for the transcriber so that she can capture everything you say and capture it accurately. Now, the final thing I should say, that it helps not to nod or shake your head. The reason being the transcriber has to catch your words yes or no.
Yes.
Now, you've given a number of statements to the inquiry, but I'd only like to ask questions in relation to two of those statements, and they'll appear in sequence on the screen in front of you. The first one is RBK 000 33719. And the second one is RBK 000 54464. Have you read both of those statements recently?
Yes, I have.
And can you confirm that their contents are true?
The content is true.
And have you discussed your statements, your evidence, with anyone else before coming here today?
No.
Thank you. Now, the first questions I'd like to discuss with you today relate to your professional background and your training. Now, first of all, looking at your qualifications and training before you joined RBKC, is it right that you have a master's degree in housing from the LSE?
Yes.
And did the course cover overseeing tenant management organisations?
No.
Did the course cover any aspects of health and safety, and in particular fire safety, in high-rise residential buildings?
No. There was a maintenance section, repairs, but not compliance.
Am I right in thinking that you've had a 29-year career in housing?
Yes.
And before joining RBKC in 2005, did you have any role overseeing an arm's length management organisation? No. Have you ever had any oversight or a role in exercising oversight over an ALMO's fire safety or health and safety remit?
No.
Now, before becoming the head of housing commissioning at RBKC in 2011, you'd been a supporting people manager at the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham, is that right?
That's correct.
And thereafter you held the same role at RBKC between 2005 and 2010?
Yes.
Now, what were your responsibilities as a supporting people manager at RBKC?
It was commissioning and performance and contract management, so scrutiny of providers in the supported housing sector.
And did you have any dealings with the TMO at all before becoming head of what was then called Performance and Partnerships?
Yes, I did. I was a member of the housing management team, so I was aware of the TMO and what they were doing. I also commissioned the community alarm service, which is provided by the TMO, was provided by the TMO.
Now, were you appointed the temporary head of Performance and Partnerships in 2010?
Yes.
And during the appointment process, were you asked if you had any experience in overseeing tenant management organisations?
I cannot remember.
Can you remember whether you were asked any questions about your health and safety or fire safety expertise?
I don't believe I was.
When you were appointed the temporary head of Performance and Partnerships, were you given any training to assist you carry out your obligations overseeing the TMO?
Governance training, I can remember that.
And what did that involve?
That was just looking at the governance arrangements with organisations such as the TMO, how the board worked, that type of thing. I also did some health and safety training, which was done at a corporate level by the council.
Were you given any fire safety training?
No,
Did the general health and safety training involve any aspect of fire safety or the management of fire safety?
it would involve some aspect of fire safety.
Can you remember what that was now?
It would be about evacuation plans, it would be about responsibilities under the reform order, legislation. I also did quite a lot of practical training when I was a frontline manager, in terms of managing fire alarms, testing, smoke detectors, that type of thing. So some of the training was operational and some of it was more legislation based.
Can you remember now when you were trained on evacuation plans, whether that subject matter caught personal emergency evacuation plans?
No, it did not include that.
Did you attend a presentation concerned with the Lacknell House fire provided by David Crowder of the BRE on the 10th of January 2014?
No, I was on leave that day.
Had you heard of the fire at Lacknell House on the 3rd of July 2009?
Yes, I have.
And were you aware of the coroner's recommendations arising from the inquest following the fire at Lacknell House?
I would have seen them at the time. Legal would have informed us.
Did your review of the recommendations made by the coroner at Lacknell cause you to change your practices or your approach to exercising oversight over the TMO?
No,
And why not?
I think that was an error on my part. I think we should have reviewed the schedule to the MMA that focused on health and safety and reviewed that document to take into account those recommendations.
Thank you. We'll come on to that later. Can you help us to why the team's name changed from Performance and Partnerships to Housing Commissioning?
I don't think there was anything specific. It was just we commissioned across a range of housing services.
Did the substance of the team's role change with the name?
No, I don't believe that it did.
When did your role as head become permanent?
Including management of the TMO contract. That was at the end of 2010.
Thank you. When you were appointed to the temporary or permanent position, did you receive any briefing, whether in the form of a handover or otherwise, regarding historic issues and concerns relating to the governance of the TMO?
Yes.
And who gave that briefing?
Pam Sedgwick did a handover, and also Laura Johnson, who was my manager.
Dealing with the briefing that Pam Sedgwick gave, can you give the gist of that handover to the panel now? What did she say to you?
I can't remember a lot about it. I can remember a particular focus on the EMB because there'd been issues with governance in the EMB.
That's the estate management.
That's correct. And also there'd been issues of governance with the TMO board, and they'd been served an improvement notice.
And can you remember now what... apologies, I spoke across you.
It was around the governance. That was the main concern, governance with the TMO board.
And can you remember now, in a more detailed way, what the precise concerns were about the governance of the TMO board?
I understand that the former chief executive had left and there was a new temporary chief executive that covered another borough as well. I understand there was some personality clashes between that person and the board, and that they got played out in the board meetings.
Can you recall any concerns regarding the handling of complaints, for example, or resident engagement matters?
Not at that stage, no.
You also referred to a handover given to you by Laura Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Can you now remember the gist of what she said to you?
It was at the same meeting. It was Laura Johnson and Pam Sedgwick. And again, the things that stick in my mind are the governance issues in relation to the EMB and the TMO.
Were you given any particular instructions or direction as to any particular areas they wanted you to concentrate on in your role?
No.
Can I now turn to the housing commissioning team itself and the structure of the department and team? And if we could go, first of all, to some organograms which just set out who was where. And first of all, I'd like to go to RBK 000 278. Now, this is a series of organograms provided by our BKC showing the structure of the housing department from 2010 to 2017, and we see there the department as at 2017. Could we turn to page 8 within this clip of documents, which is the organogram from 2010? Now, the organogram shows the structure of the housing department in 2010, so when you were appointed interim and then permanent head of housing commissioning. We can see you on the far left-hand side in the centre, is that right?
Yes.
And we can see that your role as head of supporting people is separate to and distinct from the other teams. Is that a fair comment to make?
Yes, that's correct.
And looking at that scheme, you supervised Christopher Scott, is that right?
Yes, I did.
Now, just to the right of the centre of the organogram, there's a box entitled Vacant with the title Strategy and Regeneration Manager. And we can see that that role supervised Celia Chaliscan, Jane Trethui and William Hogan. Is it right that Celia Chaliscan was responsible for managing the contract with the TMA?
Yes, it is.
TMO?
Yes.
Now, before the creation of the housing commissioning team, was it Chaliscan, Trethui and Hogan who were primarily responsible for managing that contract with the TMO?
No, it was Celia.
We can see on the extreme right of this organogram that the head of housing position is vacant, and in the centre we can see that the position of chief housing officer is also vacant. The head of housing, Amanda Gill, who's on the next left box to yours, seems to have the same level of seniority as you, Amanda Gill and Pamela Sedgwick. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, can we turn back now to page 7, which is the 2011 version of the organogram? I'll just let you have a quick read of that and ask you the question whether that organogram correctly reflects the structure in 2011.
Celia should be reporting to me.
That's the question I was going to ask you. There was no time when she wasn't reporting to anyone.
No.
Now, we don't need to go to it unless you'd like to, but you say at paragraph 11 of your first witness statement that you took on the role of head of performance and partnerships when the officer went on sabbatical in September 2010, and you took up that role temporarily. Is that right?
Yes.
And we can see that Pamela Sedgwick now appears as the head of performance, housing performance and partnerships. Is it therefore correct that for a time you were the head of housing commissioning and, temporarily at least, the head of performance and partnerships?
Yes.
Can you remember for how long you were holding those two portfolios?
Approximately 1 year.
And as we see in the centre there, Laura Johnson is now the head of housing. Was it her decision to restructure the department to create the housing commissioning team?
Yes, it was.
Can you help us as to why that decision was made?
I think Laura felt there was synergy between what my team did in terms of contract and performance management and what was needed with the TMO, which again was about managing performance and the contract.
Was the decision prompted in any way about concerns regarding the effectiveness of supervision of the TMO at that stage?
No.
Now, can we go back to page 6 in this clip, which shows the structure of the department in 2012, and we see you there on the far left, head of housing commissioning. Is that organogram correct?
There are three officers missing, supported housing commissioners.
Who reported to you?
Yes, there were 3 of them.
And we see here that Celia Chaliscan now appears to be reporting to you, along with Christopher Scott.
Yes.
And just to make it clear, she'd been reporting to you before 2012.
Yes.
It appears that a decision had been made to transfer Celia Chaliscan from the regeneration team to housing commissioning. First of all, is that assumption correct? And if so, why was she moved?
I don't think she was moved. I think that's incorrect.
And is it fair to say that as you were Celia Chaliscan's line manager, ultimately you were responsible for monitoring the performance of the TMO?
Yes.
Now, if we can go to page 5, which is the 2013 organogram, and again, you'll see yourself, same position, Head of Housing Commissioning, and Celia Chaliscan, Christopher Scott, and Jonathan Morecambe report to you. And next to you on the organogram is Roberto Cusano.
Yes.
Is that organogram accurate?
Apart from the 3 commissioning posts for supported housing that are missing, that report to me as well.
And was that the basic structure that stayed in place up until June 2017?
Yes.
Now, the next topic I'd like to discuss with you is the role of housing commissioning. First of all, who defined your team's role?
That would have been Laura Johnson. It evolved over time in terms of its responsibilities.
Now, we haven't been able to find anything in writing, but was the precise role of your team ever reduced to writing?
Sorry, can you say that again, please?
We've tried to find a document in which your team's role was set out, and we can't. Was it ever set out in writing?
Yes, we had a service plan, and there'd be a short introduction on each of the departments in that service plan. Now,
At paragraph 15 of your first witness statement, which can be found at RBK 000-33719/3, you say this: the housing commissioning team has evolved over the years. We do quite a cross-cutting role, and in some respects we pick up various things which do not fit neatly elsewhere in the housing department. Mainly our role involved specifying services, procuring services, and contract performance and management. Now, by contract performance and management, are you referring there to management of the contract with the TMO?
One of the contracts, yes.
Can you help us? Why did performance management of the TMO sit with your team?
Because it was seen as aligned with contract management. My team were responsible for performance. So Celia led on the KPIs and collected those from the TMO. So there was synergy in terms of that piece of work.
And did performance of the TMO go beyond commissioning housing?
Yes.
In what respects?
Well, you had other officers involved. So, for instance, Steve Meller from the finance department would liaise with the TMO on their finances. You had health and safety that went by borough. They linked back into the TMO. There was also the audit team that carried out the audit service. So there wasn't just my team linking into the TMO.
Did you think, or do you think it was unusual that there was not a team within the housing department that dealt solely with the TMO and its supervision?
I think the team could have been bigger. I think that it's good for staff to work across different areas to gain experience and skills and different knowledge. So I don't know that you have to have the same staff dedicated to one contract all the time. But I think the issue was probably around the size of the team rather than who was in it.
What particular skills or experiences do you think you were missing in your team to deal with the management of the TMO?
The TMO is the only borough-wide TMO in the country, and with that we'd delegated all of our responsibilities under the MMA, and I think that was too big given our responsibilities as a landlord. And when the capital programme team left the council and went over to the TMO, we lost some of our technical expertise, and I think we should have retained some of that for oversight of the TMO.
Do you think you lacked any expertise or experience in the team in health and safety, and in particular fire safety matters?
I think it would have been useful to have had more training. We did have a health and safety corporate department that we could go to if we wanted advice. So that resource was available in the council to supplement our knowledge.
Did you ever have cause to ask for greater resources to allow you to manage the TMO effectively and efficiently?
No, I did question whether or not we should bring the capital programme back in-house because of the changing work of the TMO, but no, I didn't question that.
Were there any instances where you felt the need to seek the specialist advice of your in-house health and safety team?
I think the issue with the leaseholder fire doors, we may have asked for some input for that area.
Anything more than that you can remember now?
I can't remember anything else.
Now, we don't need to go to it unless you'd like to, but between paragraphs 20 and 25 of your first statement, you set out the particular strands of work that the Housing Commissioning team did. And I think it would be useful if we go through each of those 5 strands. Now, first of all, there was the General Needs Commissioning, which was delegated to the TMO, is that right?
That's correct.
And that entailed overseeing implementation of the MMA, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you say in the 4th line of paragraph 113 of your first statement that the TMO was the only borough-wide TMO, and I think you've just confirmed the accuracy of that. Was Celia Chalascan the only officer specifically tasked on the general needs housing function which had been delegated to the TMO?
Historically, there had been 2 officers, and in 2016, the second officer requested voluntary redundancy and wasn't replaced.
And presumably wasn't replaced for financial reasons.
Yes, it delivered a saving in the department.
And did you press for a replacement officer to assist and support Celia Chalascan in her duties?
Not at that point. I mean, I supported Celia a lot with the MMA.
Did you ask for a second person at all before the fire?
No.
Did you have any concerns whether Celia Chalascan was overburdened or struggling in any way with her workload in managing the TMO?
There was nothing to indicate she was struggling.
She never said anything to you?
No.
Do you think the fact that, from 2016 onwards at least, that she was the only officer placed significant practical limitations on the level and detail of the scrutiny that could be brought to bear to the TMO's actions?
Well, she was the only dedicated officer. There was also myself and other colleagues working with the TMO. So again, Steve Miller had input through the HRA business planning and through the asset management meetings, and the regeneration team were then working closely with the TMO on feasibility studies and stock condition data to inform future plans. So I think the resources had moved more over to the regeneration side.
Now, turning now to the second strand of your work, which was supported housing commissioning, is that right?
That's correct.
And is it right that this aspect covered hostels, refuges, those with mental health needs and offender provision?
That's correct.
And is it correct that supported housing commissioning was not delegated to the TMO?
No, it's not. It is delegated to a range of external providers.
Did they include the TMO?
There was the community alarm contract with the TMO, and there was a contract for 2 support officers.
The third strand was temporary accommodation procurement, is that right?
That's correct.
And did that primarily concern the housing of homeless people?
Yes, that was temporary accommodation for people who had made a homeless application.
And am I right in thinking that the duty to house homeless people had not been delegated to the TMO under the MMA?
No, it had not been delegated to them. They did manage some temporary accommodation in HRA stock, but, it was housing management.
Now, you say in the first sentence of paragraph 23 of your first statement that there were 4 members of staff concerned with the procurement of temporary accommodation. Does it follow that the procurement of temporary accommodation was a large part of your team's work?
Yes.
And did you see the provision of temporary accommodation as being a more substantial area of your remit compared to management of the TMO?
No.
Even though there was a considerably greater number of staff dedicated to temporary accommodation?
It was a bigger portfolio in that we procured accommodation for up to 2,000 households. So the team needed to be bigger. But I didn't feel that my input was disproportionate.
Now, the fourth strand was housing and employment manager, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And did that element primarily concern working with people claiming benefits and helping them back to work?
That's correct.
And is it right that 1 member of the housing commissioning team worked on that area of work?
Yes.
And the 5th and final strand is, and you say this at paragraph 25 of your first statement, that John Morecambe, the complaints officer, he reported to you.
Yes, he did.
Why did complaints sit within housing commissioning?
Trying to think. John didn't always report to me. I can't remember why he moved to me.
To the lay eye, it looks a bit odd, given that Mr. Morecambe's prime dealings presumably would have been with the Director of Housing or the Director of Housing Needs. What would you say to that lay observation?
I would agree in that John Morecambe reported directly to Laura and Amanda Gill on complaints, as most complaints related to temporary accommodation. And I line managed John Morecambe. We had one-to-ones, appraisals, that type of thing. But in terms of his day-to-day work, he had more dealings with Laura Johnson and Amanda Gill.
So it flows from that you had a limited role in dealing with the day-to-day and the practicalities and substance of complaints. Thank you. Now, if I could now turn to ask you some more detailed questions about Celia Chaliscan.
Yeah.
Now, at the time of the fire, is it right that she'd worked for RBKC for something like more than 20 years?
Yes.
And is it right that she had the role of monitoring the TMO for some 5 years before you assumed your position as head of housing commissioning in 2010?
I believe so.
And in practice, was much of the day-to-day work of supervising the MMA left to her?
Yes.
Now, we don't need to go to it unless you'd like to, but at paragraph 40 of your first witness statement, you say this in relation to key performance indicators. Celia would meet with the TMO to work through the KPIs and agree renewed targets in each area. Did you ever attend those type of meetings, KPI meetings, with the TMO?
Yes.
Would you attend them regularly as a matter of routine or only occasionally?
We had regular meetings with the TMO. We called them HRA meetings, where we looked at key performance indicators. We'd also meet with them to discuss the mid-year review and the final review, also a 5-year review, and another one was due in 2018. So Celia would do the background work, but I would be at those meetings.
Can you help us? What was the detail of your role in ensuring that KPIs and targets in each area had been set appropriately?
I would be ultimately responsible for making sure the performance agreement was in place, and that's where the KPIs were set for the TMO.
What training had Celia Chaliscan received to allow her to do her job of supervising the TMO?
I cannot recall from the time that I started to manage her. She did a lot of training around coaching and mentoring. That's what her focus was on during the time that I line managed her. That's what I can remember.
Did she ever ask you to secure resources to get her supplemental training to allow her to do her job in relation to supervision of the TMO?
We wanted the additional training on governance, which we did commission.
And can you remember when you wanted that additional training on governance?
It might have been around 2012.
Did you get it?
Yes.
And did you receive that additional training each year, or was it a one-off event in 2012?
That was a one-off event. Celia did do some training around being a company secretary as well, because we had a council-owned company, so she did some training around that.
Was there any particular need or concern that prompted the one-off training in 2012?
I think initially, it was the governance concerns that existed in relation to the EMB.
And thereafter, Celia Chaliscan never sought additional training to allow her to do her job supervising the TMO?
Celia would attend routine mandatory training, but I don't recall her seeking additional training. She did do a procurement qualification as well, now I remember.
Okay. Now, can I turn to the MMA now, and in particular the difficulties with the MMA that you discuss in your statement? Now, if we can go to paragraph 33 of your first witness statement, which is at RBK 000 33719/6. And in the second line of that paragraph, you say this: commenting on the document itself, I didn't think the MMA was very helpful or constructive. It wasn't user-friendly for landlords, and I don't think it defined clearly enough the responsibilities between the two parties in the front of the document. Can you help us? In what respects did the MMA not clearly define the parties' respective responsibilities?
I just don't think it was a useful document. It hadn't been updated regularly, although we did update it twice ourselves. It was unwieldy to use. If you wanted to end an arrangement with a TMO, it was a difficult process. You would need the board approval. So it was very difficult to deal with emergency situations. And this is what we found when we ended the arrangement with the EMB. It took us several years to end that arrangement. And I think under the right to manage legislation, it favoured ALMOs over landlords in respect of responsibilities. That was the main problem I had with it. I think ultimately what was more important in the MMA is the schedules themselves. The schedules set out the TMO's operating procedures. And actually that was what was more useful.
Now, you go on to say in paragraph 33, and it's 7 lines down from the top of the paragraph, this: in the event of any concerns on the part of a local authority about how a TMO is exercising its functions, the process prescribed by the MMA involves a long series of steps which are both onerous and slow-moving. Those are the problems which you've just adverted to.
Yes.
Now, between 2010 and the 14th of June 2017, were you ever concerned that there was no proper mechanism or no proper arrangements for RBKC to raise performance-related concerns with the TMO?
No, the MMA was clear on that around the improvement plan and the serving the breach notice.
At any point, did you consider it necessary to take any of the steps identified or prescribed in the MMA?
Not since I took up the post, no.
Was there any time when you were deterred from taking action under the MMA because of the onerous and time-consuming nature of the arrangements in place?
Absolutely not.
Now, could we turn to an email? I'm afraid it's from 2011. It can be found at RBK 000050408. And it's an email chain from 2011, which started on the 4th of January 2011 between Celia Chaliscan and Bryony Willett and Anthony Jonas of Islington Council. You're not copied into the email chain. And I'll just let you cast your eye over the email at the bottom of the page. And if necessary, you see the other page, but probably not.
I'm familiar with this.
You are?
Yeah.
Now, if we go to page 2, you can see at the bottom of that page the initial email. First of all, were you aware that Celia was talking to other local authorities about dealing with the practical difficulties encountered in managing the MMA?
I asked Celia to do this.
And were there any particular concerns or needs that prompted that request to Celia?
2011. Again, I think it was the governance problems we were having with the EMB.
And was this just after you took over as the head of the team?
Yeah.
Now, you'll see in the original email, it says in the penultimate line, we are renewing the KNC TMO's MMA, and I've been asked to look at the best practice and what else other councils' TMOs are doing. So first of all, you would be in the request she's referring to there.
Yes.
Now, was RBKC considering a review of the MMA in 2011, can you remember?
Yes, we wanted to review the clauses and we needed to update some of the schedules. There was another formal review. We commissioned a consultant to look at the MMA to advise on changes.
And what was his name or her name?
I'm sorry, I can't remember his name.
Am I right in thinking that the revised MMA was not put into effect until 2015?
Yes.
Can you help us then as to why the process took what appears to be 4 years plus?
There was a protracted process between ourselves and the TMO Company Secretary. there were a number of key legislation changes that came in around 2012 around self-financing and around the Localism Act. So I had to do quite a lot of work in the background in terms of updating the MMA. We would have updated it earlier, but as we became aware of new legislation coming in, we delayed updating it again. So it was quite a protracted business, and it took some substantial time.
Thank you. Now, if we go back to the first page of this email, we can see, hopefully, Mr. Jonas's response there in the bottom half of that page, dated the 5th of January 2011 at 9:55. And it says in the third paragraph, the MMA, even the latest version, is a very poor document and does not handle the relationship between the parties well. It has caused us a lot of difficulties. I would have thought that for the K&C TMO, we would want a much better contract, more on the lines of an ALMO agreement. Now, did Celia Chaliscan report Mr. Jonas's opinion back to you, can you remember?
Yes, and that's when we agreed to commission an expert to look at the MMA.
We've got your views. We have Mr. Jonas's views here. Was a negative view of the template MMA a widely held view amongst local authorities at that time?
I believe so.
Now, Mr. Jonas refers there to a much better contract along the lines of an ALMO agreement. Did RBKC have any bespoke contract or access to a precedent for an ALMO agreement?
We could have had access to an agreement. It wouldn't need to have been substantially different because of the level of delegation to the TMO.
And can you remember, did you ever seek one out?
Yes. Celia would have sought one out. But ultimately, in this case, we commissioned the expert to look at the document and make recommendations.
And did you evaluate the option of adapting an ALMO agreement during the course of this review process, so between 2011 and 2015?
Celia would have shared this with him and made him aware of the research that we've done.
Can you help us as to why the decision was made not to go down the ALMO route, if I can put it like that?
I cannot remember the explicit decision.
Now, it was noted by Mr. Jonas that Islington's TMOs were very different in managing a limited amount of property. And if we could go back to your first statement, in particular paragraph 112, and that can be found at RBK 000-33719/23. And paragraph 112 starts with these words: "It is an open question whether a borough-wide TMO is the best model of managing social housing, and whether this structure made it too difficult for us as a landlord to effectively monitor the exercise of all its functions." Now, did you have, and it may well be this is obvious, the answer flowing from earlier answers, did you have and hold those concerns about the size of the TMO before the 14th of June 2017?
Yes.
Did you express those concerns to anyone at RBKC?
I spoke to Laura Johnson about should we bring the capital programme back in-house because of the increasing work we were doing around regeneration. But that was not because I perceived there was a specific risk. I just didn't think the model was particularly good. And as the council was going to be investing major money on its estates, I just wondered if the capital programme would be best with us.
Can you remember now when that conversation with Laura Johnson took place?
I'd be guessing.
Don't guess if you can't remember.
No.
Can you remember the gist of her response?
That there wasn't an appetite to bring it back in-house at the moment.
Was that due to the administrative inconvenience, cost? Did she specify the particular reasons why there was an absence of appetite?
I think people wanted the TMO to succeed.
Were your concerns shared with anyone else within your department, in particular Celia Chaliscan?
Yes, we talked about it.
And was there a consensus view about the benefits of bringing back the capital project team?
I don't think we talked about it in great detail, to be honest with you.
So is it fair to say there wasn't a groundswell of concern?
No.
Now, could I move away and deal with a separate topic, and that's really Mark Anderson's workload. And if I could go to RBK 000045642, and it's an email exchange between you and Celia Chaliscan on the 17th of July 2012. And if I could ask us to go to page 7 in this chain, you'll see that it was initiated by a letter from the Grenfell Tower Leaseholders Association written to Mr. Paul Dunkerton of the TMO, and it concerned the appointment of Studio E. Now, do you recall this email?
Yes.
And we can see that the letter complained about a number of matters, about lack of communication from the TMO in relation to the appointment of Studio E. Mark Anderson responded to the email on the 17th of July 2012 at 10:12, and that can be found at the bottom of page 5. And we see that there. And Jane Trethewey, who reported to you, is copied in. Now, if we can go up to the bottom of page 2 of this chain now, we see that Jane Trethewey emailed you and Celia Chaliscan expressing dissatisfaction with the lines of communication with the Grenfell residents. She concluded over the page at page 3, and in the final paragraph of this email, with these words: all of this rather adds to the impression of Mark being overloaded and perhaps promising things that the TMO are not currently structured to deliver. My first question is this: did you think at the time that Mark Anderson was overloaded with work?
I didn't specifically have that as a concern.
Did you have it as a general concern?
No, I didn't deal with Mark Anderson a lot. Jane dealt with him more.
Did you have many conversations about this issue with Jane?
There was frustration on behalf of Jane in relation to comms and not responding to leaseholders. She was concerned about the impact on the relationship with the leaseholders and with communications more general with residents at that point in time. Mark Anderson also wasn't responsive to Jane or myself.
Dealing with her concerns about the communications with residents, in particular leaseholders, did those concerns persist throughout Mark Anderson's time at the TMO?
I think Jane did push for some improvement. During that time, we met with Yvonne Birch and I can't remember who else from the TMO, but we looked at setting out a protocol for communications on major works. So that was one of the ways that we managed that situation.
And was that protocol enacted?
Yes.
In relation to Mr. Anderson's lack of responsiveness to you, did you press him on the need for responsiveness, and did he mend his ways thereafter?
Jane very much pressed him in relation to her work areas. As I said, I didn't have that much to do with him. It appeared to us that his preference was to liaise with Laura Johnson primarily, and not ourselves. We did make some inroads. There was some improved communications with leaseholders. They particularly wanted to know if they would be recharged for improvement works, and we did get clarity on that matter, but Jane very much had to push for that.
Was there a consensus, to the best of your knowledge, at RBKC that the TMO was not structured to deliver projects such as Grenfell?
I think at the time that I became involved with the TMO, the capital programme had transferred over a number of years before. When I first got involved with them, there were a number of interim heads of assets, so there wasn't any permanency, and Mark Anderson was an interim as well. So I felt there was a lack of structure. Robert Black certainly recognised that when he came in, and Laura certainly worked more closely with the TMO. And that's when they started to restructure and went out for Peter Madison's post. Then I saw a clear improvement in the structure of that part of the organisation.
And did that improvement continue throughout until the time of the fire?
I think sometimes the that there was issues with one of the posts that used to report to Peter Madison. It was kind of a strategic manager post. We did recruit a couple of times to that post, and we had difficulty keeping people in post on a permanent basis.
Can you remember why? Sorry to cut. Can you remember why you had those difficulties?
I think possibly people thought that the TMO would be doing wide-scale regeneration, and that wasn't the case.
Now, can we go back to this email chain and go back to page 2? And Celia emails... Sorry, there we go. Yes, Celia emails you at 1:10 p.m. It's in the middle of just below halfway point of that page, and says this: I think we need to be having a word with Yvonne and Sasha. So that'd be Yvonne Birch and Sasha Jevons, presumably, on this. So there needs to be the joint working between the teams. How should we handle? Shall I draft something to them both? Were the teams working effectively before this issue was raised, do you think?
This exposed the issue.
Did you want to see more joint working, or did you think there was a need for more joint working between the TMO and the RBKC teams?
I think as they started to undertake major projects such as Grenfell, or some of the smaller development projects such as Hidden Homes, we needed to work more closely with them as the landlord.
Can we now go to the top of page 2 of this page, and it's your response at 1:18, and you say, I've been thinking, do you think the MMA covers us enough for these types of projects? And then if we go to the first page of this chain, you email again at 1:40, and you say this in the second paragraph: let's still look at the MMA and set up the meeting with Yvonne to take forward the resident engagement issues in general, as we're intending to. We'll chat tomorrow. And Celia responds almost immediately at 1:41, immediately above that: OK, the MMA just wasn't designed for this sort of thing. When we start looking at the new arrangements, then we'll need to do quite a bit of work about getting the agreement right. Did you agree with that opinion?
Yes.
Is there any other reasons that you can give to the panel above those you've already given as to why you held that view?
It might not have been the MMA in retrospect. It might have been the schedules which set out the operational procedures. So we didn't have one around the resident engagement side in terms of comms on major works. And also we didn't have, whilst we delegated all the capital programme management to the TMO, we didn't have a specific reporting mechanism in the schedules. So I think it was a mixture of the schedules needed to be updated, as well as looking at the MMA itself.
And those are the principal deficiencies that you considered at the time?
At the time, yes. I also think a deficiency was that we didn't update it after 2005 legislation on fire safety.
Now, if we can go to the very top of this page, it's an email from you sent at 1:42. You say, that's what I've been thinking. You'd have a much more specific contract. After the EPG matter, we need to be careful. Does EPG refer to Elm Park Gardens?
Yes.
And very briefly, can you give the panel the gist of the matter and the concerns that motivated that email?
There were major works carried out over a number of years. The works were quite protracted. Legislation changed during the time of the works, and as the works were done, we uncovered more issues with the building. That led to us having concerns about the recharges to leaseholders, and we had to write off about £1.2 million.
Now, we're still on the 17th of July 2012, but I'd like you to look at a separate document, and it's another email to Jane Trethewey, and it can be found at RBK 000 456 43 and then /1. And we see the email at the top there. And you say, I've spoken to, see the third paragraph, I've spoken to Celia, and we do not think the MMA covers this type of project sufficiently. Given the ongoing concern, should we start to threat them as we would an external contractor in relation to any major capital programme where we are providing the funding? Perhaps this will give us more checks and balances, given the pending writing off of £1.9 million of leaseholder payments in relation to EPG. We in the TMO cannot allow for anything like this to go wrong again in the future. EPG will be fresh in our councillors' minds for a long, long time, a helpful context for our discussions with the TMO on how things can be improved. Now, when you talked about treating the TMO as an external contractor, what additional checks and balances did you have in mind beyond those you identified in the answer earlier ago?
Formal reporting into the council on major projects.
Can you help us know as to how and perhaps why RBKC was treating the TMO differently to an external contractor?
Because we'd never commissioned those types of works from them before. The capital programme team went over. Had been part of the council. At that point in time, we should have reviewed the MMA and looked at what the schedule said.
And can you help the panel? Did you put in place any additional checks and balances to address the deficiencies you'd identified?
Well, here it was concern around communication with leaseholders, and that had been an issue with Elm Park Gardens, so we put in place the resident engagement protocol. The resident engagement continued to be delegated to the TMO, but we monitored that and we were kept aware of that. In terms of the major works, we developed a protocol which focused on exception reporting on major works, and we also set up monthly asset management meetings with the TMO, so we worked much more closely with them on the capital programme and highlight reports for all the major projects.
Thank you. How did you monitor performance of the protocol in relation to resident engagement?
We do it through the asset management meetings. There was a communications part and the highlight report, but also we were in close conversation with the TMO all of the time, so we knew about how they were communicating with the residents. Now,
is it right that the revised MMA, which came into force in 2015, made no changes to the oversight of major projects beyond those you've identified?
Yes.
Can you help us why, given the background of concerns you'd had going back to 2011 or thereabouts?
I thought the two protocols set things out clearly. They weren't huge documents, they needed to be simple. The highlight reports seemed to be working. We could have put more in there, I would acknowledge that.
And what would that more be? Can you help the panel?
Possibly. I mean, there was quite a lengthy schedule in there around delegating major works to them and procurement, but it would have been good to have a technical review of the document.
Can I now turn to perhaps the next topic, which is linked, and that's monitoring the TMO performance. And the first aspect of this is the annual performance reports and agreement. And if I could ask us to go to paragraph 88 of your first witness statement, which is at RBK 0033719/7. And you say in paragraph 38 this: turning to the ways we sought to implement the MMA, the key document was an annual performance agreement which we drew up every year with the TMO. First of all, what was your role in drafting the mid-year and annual performance review?
Celia Charles-Khan drafted that document. I would review it.
To what extent, how deep was your review before the drafts were put before the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee?
I see several drafts.
What steps did you take to ensure that the information provided by the TMO to you was accurate?
A lot of the information was known to me already through my working arrangements with them. We were in contact with them on a regular basis. We had regular meetings with them. I would review it, and if there was something that wasn't familiar to me, then I would ask about it. But we did meet with them an awful lot on a lot of subject matters.
To what extent was RBKC's health and safety advisor involved in the setting and monitoring of KPIs which involved health and safety?
The high-level KPI we had for health and safety was the gas tests. That wouldn't have been sat with the health and safety, that would have sat with contract management in the property side of the business. Any other KPIs were dealt with internally by the TMO.
Did the RBKC's health and safety advisor ever suggest that fire safety generally or any element of fire safety management should be the subject of a KPI?
No.
Did you ever suggest that fire safety generally or any element of fire safety management should be the subject of a KPI?
No.
Can you explain why fire safety was never the subject of a KPI?
I think it wasn't just fire safety. I think there were a number of compliance indicators which should have been subject to a KPI. A lot of the KPIs we reported at through the performance agreement were quite high level. We would review them on an annual basis with the performance manager and the TMO. We would look at what Housemark, the benchmarking club, was putting forward. At that time, the industry wasn't collecting compliance KPIs widely. So we would compare what we were collecting.
You said fire safety ought to have been the subject of a KPI. Are there any other matters relevant to health and safety which now you think ought to have been subject of a KPI before the fire?
Asbestos management, Legionella.
Was there any discussion as to whether specific elements such as closing down significant actions arising out of fire risk assessments ought to be the subject of a KPI?
No, there wasn't, but that should be another KPI going forward.
Were you aware of the long-running concerns regarding the closing out of significant actions arising out of FRAs?
No, I wasn't.
Can you help us? What process was followed in broad terms by which a KPI was identified and then set?
Well, initially you would have KPIs set by central government. You had best value KPIs several years ago. You would then have corporate KPIs, which would have oversight. So we would liaise between the corporate centre and the TMO and agree those KPIs. After the Cameron government came in, a lot of that was rolled back in terms of performance management, so it slimmed down substantially. Going forward, we would look at benchmarking and we would liaise with the performance manager, who is very knowledgeable in the area.
What evidence would RBKC use to decide whether a KPI had been met, and if so, to what extent?
We received a dashboard, targets were set, and the achievements were set out on that dashboard. The direction of travel was set out. There would be commentary if there were key issues. At our meetings with the TMO, we would review the documentation. In the past, there had been audits of KPIs. That was another requirement that stopped when there was a change in government.
Who actually decided whether a KPI had been met or not?
The TMO used their reporting systems, so ultimately we relied on their information. In the past, we did do the data audits where we could have tested that data more.
So RBKC's health and safety advisor wouldn't be involved at all in the process of determining whether a KPI had been met or not?
He would have liaised directly with Janice. The main one we were collecting was on gas safety, and I was also copied into emails from Robert Black to Laura Johnson where he was commenting on the achievement under that KPI.
What was the extent of your involvement, if any, in the process which considered the evidence regarding compliance?
There was just that one gas one, and again that would be reviewed under the dashboard arrangement.
Would it be fair to say that Laura Johnson was ultimately responsible for approving the annual review?
Yes.
Now, can we turn to one of the annual performance reviews, and it's for the year 2013-14, and that can be found at RBK 000-32466. And if we could go to the bottom of page 3, and we see Laura Johnson's name in the centre at the bottom of that. Would it have been Celia Chaliscan who would have drafted the report, though?
Yes.
And if we could go to page 15, and section 3.9 and the bottom right-hand box, and it states at the end of the second line, the programme of communal area fire risk assessment, FRAs, and their reviews continue. Further significant progress has been made to address the recommendations made by the FRAs. Now, can you help here? What was meant by significant progress?
There would be a range of different actions that came out of the FRAs. Some of them would be quite straightforward, like removal of rubbish. Others may be more in-depth, such as if any of the ventilation system needed works or anything like that. That is a TMO report back.
Now, the phrase further significant progress there may be read as implying that there had been a pre-existing problem regarding recommendations made by these FRAs. Would that be a fair reading of that last sentence at the bottom of page 15?
My understanding is that around 2009, 2010, there'd been concerns raised around the FRA process, and then the TMO were asked to commission an independent advisor, a fire risk assessor, and my team were involved in the procurement of that person. So all the fire risk assessments were redone, and we agreed a priority with the LFB. In reality, the fire risk assessments are an ongoing document. As soon as you've finished reviewing them, you need to start to review them again because things change on the ground. So I'm assuming there that that's what that relates to.
Even though it's 2013-14 and the problems have been identified some 2 or 3 years before then?
Yes, but also, you know, if it was a brand new programme of fire risk assessments, it would take a substantial amount of time to do all of those fire risk assessments.
And would that be a reason why you weren't unduly concerned at this stage that there were clearly continuing issues regarding FRAs?
That was my understanding, yes.
What information was available to RBKC to enable it to make the statement that significant progress had been made?
The Health and Safety report was annual to the Corporate Health and Safety Committee. Celia may have reviewed that.
And again, the information would have come from the TMO, would it?
Yes.
Can you help us with the detail of RBKC's oversight of the progress with FRA recommendations? Was it something, for example, that was a regular and consistent topic of consideration within the Housing Commissioning team?
No, it wasn't. That once we'd established the recommissioning of those FRAs, we felt that it was embedded in the organisation and that they were on top of things there. So it wasn't a concern at that time, no.
And did it become a concern at any time before the fire?
No.
Just put it even more starkly, is your evidence that at no time before the fire did Celia Chalascan raise with you any concerns about progress in implementing FRA actions?
No.
Could we now go to the 2014-15 annual review, which can be found at RBK quadruple 03649/13. And we have paragraph 3.71, and that referred to the introduction of a health and safety plan in the opening sentence of the right-hand column, which had been introduced to quotes to facilitate monitoring of compliance with legislation and good practice by the KCTMO Health and Safety Committee. Now, does that mean that the Health and Safety Plan provided the framework under which RBKC monitored the TMO's Health and Safety Committee, or did it refer to the TMO's Health and Safety Committee monitoring the TMO's compliance with its health and safety obligations?
It's the TMO monitoring its own compliance.
Did the TMO Health and Safety Committee report to you their findings regarding compliance and best practice?
No, there was one annual report to Corporate Health and Safety.
Okay. Now, can we look at the third bullet point in that right-hand column? And it says in relation to the 4 areas relating to fire safety described as areas where progress had been noted. Now, did you accept that statement at face value and without challenge?
Could you ask me that again, please?
Yes, of course. You look there, see the third bullet point? Mm-hmm. It says the closer scrutiny of fire safety issues on the estates.
Yes.
Did you accept that statement at face value and without challenge?
Yes.
Now, can we now go to the 2015-2016 TMO performance agreement, and that can be found at RBK.
I'm just wondering, Mr. Kinnear, whether we're reaching a convenient point.
I was going to push my luck for 5 more minutes, sir, but I don't want to be pushing my luck dangerously.
No, that's quite right. But you know whether we're going to a new document, a new topic, or what?
We're going to a new document, and we can break here. It'd be convenient places,
Sure?
Annie. I'm
Yes,
sure.
all right. Ms. Johnson, we have a break during each session, and I think this would be a good time to take it, so we'll stop now. We'll resume at 25 to 4, please. And I'm going to ask you, as I've asked everybody else, please don't talk about your evidence or anything to do with it while you're out of the room.
Okay.
All right? Thank you very much. Would you like to go with the usher? All right, 25 to 4 then.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Yes, would you ask Ms Johnson to come back in, please? All right, Mr Johnson, you ready to carry on?
Yes, I am.
Good, thank you. Yes, Mr Cleary.
Thank you, sir. Ms Johnson, could we go to the 2015-16 TMO Performance Agreement, which can be found at RBK quadruple 0589/29. And if that could be expanded, if possible, we have paragraph 3.6, and in the right-hand column, third bullet point, it says the programme of fire risk assessments and reviews to continue, and more work to ensure actions and recommendations from these are consistently completed in a timely manner. Would that text have been drafted by Celia Chaliscan?
In conjunction with Janice Ray,
And did you read this report in draft?
I would have.
And would that third bullet point flag to you, or did it flag to you at the time, that there were issues regarding the timely completion of actions and recommendations arising out of FRAs?
I wasn't aware of that, no.
No. So would you have read each page of it and the detail of the report, or would you have skim-read the report?
No, I would have read it in detail.
But that particular bullet point didn't strike you as important at the time?
I knew it was an ongoing programme.
Were you provided with any information about what was being done about actions that were necessary to deal with works arising from FRAs?
I can't recall any information. I knew there was a fire risk assessment done during the works on Grenfell Tower. I knew there was an ongoing programme.
Given that the purpose of a risk assessment is to identify, eliminate, or at least mitigate risk, can you explain why this particular point didn't strike you as important at the time?
Because it was part of an ongoing programme of works, which would be a rolling programme. We should have given compliance more scrutiny than we did.
And if you had scrutinised the subject matter of this third bullet point in more detail, what action would you have taken or asked Celia Chaliscan to take?
To do a data audit.
Essentially to look at the log of outstanding repairs, for example.
Or to liaise with Richard Buckley, who's the Corporate Health and Safety Manager, and get his view on things. I remember I did speak to him on a number of occasions around health and safety and fire safety, and I know he was always happy with Janice's work. I do recall speaking to him.
And you never had cause to discuss FRAs and actions arising with him?
No.
Now, can we turn to a separate but linked topic, and that's scrutiny beyond KPIs?
Yes.
What was the extent to which the TMO was obliged to provide information to RBKC beyond the KPIs?
There was the performance agreement, which was qualitative information. There would be financial performance information that would be provided by the TMO to the housing finance team. There were the highlight reports from the asset management meeting. I met with the TMO and corporate property on a regular basis to review the commercial portfolio of HRA properties, and there were KPIs there that were separate to being discussed through the performance agreement.
And now, if we can look at this in slightly more detail, if we can go to paragraphs 51 through to 53 of your first witness statement, which is at RBK 000-33719, and page, /9. Now, you say there the council will receive information, I'm talking about information here, and scheduled bi-monthly meetings called the Housing Revenue Account Meetings, or HRA meetings, and you say the purpose was to manage and review performance. Mm-hmm. Now, you say in these meetings that you only scrutinise those high-level KPIs which the council had agreed to collect as part of the annual performance agreement. Does that remain your evidence?
Yes. What I haven't put in that statement is that there was a standard agenda where there was a number of items that we would cover, such as complaints, resident issues, health and safety was on there. So there was also qualitative minutes taken of those meetings, and the actions would be monitored.
Now, in the opening sentence of paragraph 53, which is over the page at page 10, you say that the HRA meetings had, as you've just said, a standard agenda, and that did include health and safety. Now, we know that there was no KPI set by RBKC in relation to health and safety. So why was it then a standing item on the agenda?
Because we wanted to be made aware of any issues.
And in that regard, can we take it that FRA action points were not a significant feature?
No.
Was there any element of fire safety a feature in those meetings to the best of your recollection?
I remember we got updates following the Adair and Hazelwood fire. There was updates through the HRA meeting there.
Were you aware of the deficiency notice that was served and later the enforcement notice that was served in relation to Adair Tower?
Yes, I was, and those would be reported in the performance agreement as well.
Did the fact and content of those notices prompt you to initiate any further inquiries or investigations to how effectively the TMO was managing fire safety, at least in relation to Adair?
We met with them following the Adair fire and had a review, and that was when the issue of the door closers came up. I met with Janice Ray and other staff from the TMO, I can't recall who, and some of our own council staff to review our response in terms of the escalation process. And it was agreed that we would review our escalation. From that, I spoke to our emergency planning manager about what would happen in terms of decanting, because whilst the TMO oversaw the response, they were RBKC tenants, so our residents. And we initiated an emergency scenario exercise plan. I wasn't involved in that, but I asked for it to be completed, and that focused on one of our supported housing schemes that was managed by a third-party contract and the TMO, and that operational exercise did take place. They kept us updated in terms of the deficiency notice. I remember receiving regular updates. And I remember Councillor Fielding Mellon also wanting regular updates, which I helped with. So I was constantly being updated by the TMO after that fire.
Can you remember now what the particular issue was in relation to door closers at Adair?
They wanted us to install the door closers where they were missing.
And what was Janice Ray's report to you on that particular topic?
Janice Ray, I don't think, did do a report. I believe that Barbara Matthews did a report and took it to the joint management meeting with ourselves and the TMO. There was also another separate meeting where I recall we looked at the budget, because we would have to increase the budget. So we met with Laura, Barbara, Steve Meller from Finance, and we agreed to increase the budget.
Did you have any discussion with Janice Ray regarding the topic of door closers at Adair?
No, it was all done through those formal meetings.
You mentioned there a exercise in relation to supported housing. Was there any discussion of personal emergency evacuation plans arising from that exercise that you can remember?
I wasn't involved in the exercise. I could make the assumption that there would be, because Spurgess Field was a supported housing scheme known as an extra care scheme. So you would expect to have peeps in place for all the tenants there. But I wasn't involved in that particular exercise. I would be very disappointed if they weren't there.
Okay. Now, could I now turn to a separate document, TMO 00849-347, and it's the minutes of an HRA meeting on the 29th of April 2013. Excuse me. Now, you did not attend, but a number of representatives of RBKC did. And if we can go to page 4 and paragraph 9.1 in particular, and you'll see there under H&S, Health and Safety, nothing to report. If the TMO had nothing to report in relation to health and safety, did RBKC have any arrangements for scrutinising the accuracy of that report?
Not sufficiently so, no.
You say not sufficient. In what respects were the arrangements lacking?
I think Janice Ray should have been invited to this meeting.
Would you have asked, for example, the RBKC health and safety advisor to attend these meetings to press TMO on the accuracy and detail of the information they were giving to you?
With hindsight, we should have had a specific meeting between the corporate safety manager and Janice.
Now, if I could go back to your first statement in paragraph 64, and that can be found at RBK 000-33719/12. Excuse me. And it's the fourth line, which says the council did not have access to the Keystone database. And you go on in the next paragraph to say this, and I quote, "I found this was a bit cumbersome at times because it meant that the council was reliant on the TMO for information about its housing stock. The information included data on the layout and characteristics of properties, which was used to identify buildings in need of refurbishment or regeneration and so on. However, at the same time, it was a question of who had the technical expertise to interrogate or interpret that information. Those technical functions had been delegated to the TMO's asset management team, so they had the staff, or at least access to specialists, who could carry out those functions. Why was RBKC unwilling or unable to arrange for you to have access to the Keystone database?
They gave us demonstrations to the Keystone database, and the regeneration team were starting to talk to the TMO about getting access. So it wasn't ever off the table, so as to speak. What was happening at that time was there were increasing requests coming from the regeneration team for stock condition data. So it just seemed cumbersome that we had to go to the TMO for everything, and it would have been preferable to access that ourselves. But we would have needed someone with the skill set in the regeneration team.
And did the TMO ever refuse you access to that database?
No.
Did it ever concern you that, flows from the answer you've just now given, did it ever concern you that RBKC was reliant on the TMO for all this information?
Yes.
And were those concerns that you voiced before the fire, and if so, when and to whom?
There was a general discussion. Myself and Laura met with Peter Madison and Sasha Jevons about access to information that the regeneration team were requesting. We asked if there was a resource issue, and we were told no. Again, I think it was just cumbersome that we had to go to them for data on our own stock.
Did you sense any resistance from Sasha Jevons or Peter Madison to giving you access to Keystone?
Not at all.
Can you explain for the panel what the consequence was for you of complete reliance on the TMO for the information, for the exercise of your scrutiny functions?
Well, all the functionality for housing management was delegated to them. They delivered the service, so they reported on the service. And we had to have a level of trust with them. With any contractor, it's the same with any contract that you commission. You have a specification for the service, a contract, an MMA, performance management information. We've got methods of self-assessment by providers. There has to be a certain amount of trust about what they're telling you. I think some of the things that we used to do, like the data audits, would be good in retrospect. I think we should have had someone with more technical experience in the team around specifically compliance and building management. And I was going to say something else. There's another thing.
Don't worry, it may come back to you.
That's annoying.
Health and safety.
Oh, the Audit Commission was disbanded by government.
In your view, what gap did the Audit Commission leave in the arrangements for your monitoring of the TMO?
They'd done a review of the TMO, I think about 2000 and I can't remember, 2006.
I think that's right.
Yes, and it was just helpful to have that kind of inspection regime. I'd gone through an audit commission inspection and it was really robust and tough, and you really had to demonstrate what you were delivering in terms of your service. And I just think that was a very helpful concept, and I think especially in an area like housing management, where compliance is so important, I think, more regulation would help.
Would the Audit Commission look at the effectiveness of resident engagement?
Yes.
Would it look at discharge of health and safety responsibilities?
Yes.
And as part of that, would it have looked at discharge of fire risk assessment and fire safety responsibilities?
It would have, yes.
Can you help me as to why RBKC didn't put in place arrangements which replicated the Audit Commission's functions?
I think at the time a lot of the performance management functions in local government was scaled back.
Did you ever suggest replicating or reflecting the Audit Commission's arrangements as a mechanism for keeping check on the TMO when you were wholly reliant and taking on trust all the information from them in discharging your scrutiny function?
No, I didn't.
Did anyone suggest that?
No.
Now can we turn to the RBKC Corporate Health and Safety Manager and Committee, and can we go to paragraph 43 in this statement, which is at page 8, so just back 4 pages. And paragraph 43 says this, and I quote, "The TMO also reported to the RBKC Corporate Health and Safety Manager with copies of Health and Safety Committee minutes and an exec summary of their annual health and safety report for inclusion in his annual report to committee. The TMO Health and Safety Manager also attended corporate health and safety meetings." Were you sent copies of the reports?
They would be on our website.
Did you ever read them?
I recall reading them, yes.
Would you do that routinely?
If they were sent to me or I went onto the website and found them, yes, I would never not read anything that was sent me.
Did the reports form part of the process of identifying KPIs for the annual performance agreement purposes?
No.
Can you explain why not? Was it just custom and practice that they weren't?
It was custom and practice. We would look at what was being collected in the sector. We would look at what the priorities were for the TMO and for the council. We'd look at where there was areas for improvement, so it would be a range of activities.
Now, we don't need to go to it unless you'd like to, but Janice Ray, in her first witness statement, and it's at paragraph 183, said this: "The health and safety performance of the TMO was monitored primarily by the RBKC. We welcomed this scrutiny and were always looking to improve health and safety for the sake of the residents and staff." Was health and safety performance of the TMO primarily monitored by RBKC?
Through this mechanism, yes.
Now, Janice Ray says at paragraph 164 of that first statement that monitoring was carried out by the RBKC Corporate Health and Safety Advisors. Is that right?
Yes.
And that was Gary Mann until 2015, and then his successor, Samaya Yaqub, thereafter. Is that right?
Yes.
What was the role of the Housing Department in monitoring health and safety as it was applied in the TMO's housing stock?
The annual review, we would look at health and safety key issues that we were looking at. They collected for us the KPI on access to do gas checks, and health and safety was a regular meeting. I also had, I would also go to Janice Ray on a day-to-day basis if things came across my desk. I was also involved on the ground with residents when they raised concerns. We had the good ferry plot concerns raised by residents at Portobello at Longlands Road. I was involved in discussions around access to Frinstead House, which is one of our tower blocks on the Silchester estate. So I would get involved operationally if residents came with particular concerns.
Now, in your view, was there a potential gap between the scrutiny exercised by your department on the one side and the Joint Corporate Health and Safety Committee on the other?
Yes.
How was the risk of a gap or information falling between the two entities? How was that mitigated or eliminated?
I don't think it was mitigated. I also think that environmental health became a by-borough service, and I think that reduced that made that more of a possibility.
Can you recall any specific health and safety, fire safety issues that was missed because it fell between the Housing Department and the Joint Corporate Health and Safety Committee?
Not that I can recall.
Can we now turn to the Asset Management Protocol? And if we can go to paragraph 86 in your first statement, which is at page 17, and you say this, and I quote, "As the TMO began to work more actively on hidden homes and the nature of its capital spending was changing, I still felt we needed more oversight of the project once the build was underway on site, as opposed to when it was at the capital planning stages as described above. I tasked Celia to look at the MMA about reporting to the Council on capital works. There wasn't any particular process prescribed by the MMA, so we began to develop a protocol to use instead." First of all, what led you to develop the protocol?
Because we looked at the MMA and there was nothing in there about reporting to the council on key capital projects.
And was that a result of the email correspondence you'd had with Jane Trethuey in July 2012?
It was one of the results, yes.
Now, could we look at RBK 000-45677, and in particular page 3 of that email chain? Now, the email chain, if we just go up to page 2, it starts with an email dated the 3rd of September 2012 from Mark Anderson to Keith Mott, and it copied in Laura Johnson and others. Jane Trethuey, if we go further up, then responds to you and Laura Johnson on the 4th of September. Let's just up this page. AJ/LJ, expressing her dissatisfaction with Mr. Anderson's response. And the email says this: "Regarding the below, I just don't think this is a good enough answer to the leaseholders' queries. Essentially, as they made clear in their emails, and most recently on the 5th of August, we request you to be more direct to our question. So to say yes, it will be an improvement, so therefore there will be no recharges to the leaseholders. I feel as though these repeated rebuffs to them and a claim not to understand what it is they are asking for risk damaging the relationship between the TMO and leaseholders and make the delivery of this project more difficult. Efforts to get the TMO to consider a more open approach fell on deaf ears. I understand the TMO has been seeking a final position before clarifying it to leaseholders. There is no reason to avoid clarifying the process and likely timetable in writing to them. As I am not receiving updates on Grenfell directly, I am now unsure how or whether to take this matter further and would welcome any views." And if we go on to page 1 of this chain, on the 4th of September as well, you respond. And again, I'll read it out. "I think we need to develop a formal protocol with the TMO on how they manage any development, regeneration, major capital projects. This would include a specific section in managing communication. Celia has suggested that the work done on car parks could form a useful basis for developing the communication element. Once we have this, and we will prioritise this, then we should develop formal reporting arrangements with highlight reports that link to the HRA meetings, Regen Board as appropriate. I suggest we also include terms of reference which set out the council's and the TMO's respective roles and responsibilities. We can then also link any performance measures into the capital business plan and overall TMO performance plan. Whilst this may not resolve all ongoing issues, it will provide us with a formal framework for overseeing these more complex areas of work that cannot be effectively picked up under the current MMA. Any framework once developed can be a variation to the MMA." Now, presumably this is part of the measures you were describing earlier to the panel.
Yes.
Now, can we now look at a separate document, which is RBK 000-46083, and it's another email chain. And at the bottom of the page, which sets out an email from Celia Chaskan to you and Roger Keane on the 30th of July 2014, sent at 10:03. I should have asked you this earlier. You referred to a second officer working with Celia. Was that Roger Keane?
Yes, it was.
Now, as we've just discussed, we know that you suggested a protocol in September 2012.
Yes.
Why had it taken until July 2014 for a draft protocol to be produced? Can you help us?
I think that would be about the time, I believe, that the monitoring came over to my team. We had drafted a protocol and we had distributed it. I know that there was some toing and froing with the TMO on the document.
Now, if you exhibit a copy of the final protocol to your witness statement, and you say in your first witness statement, and for reference it's paragraph 87, that this was minuted at an asset management meeting and circulated, but you weren't too sure whether it had been formally adopted. Is that a fair summary of your view?
Yes, but it would be something that I would go to if I had concerns raised with me.
Now, can we look at RBK quadruple 02368/14? And there we go, Schedule 9, Asset Management Principles and Processes for Asset Management Projects and Hidden Homes. That's one of the embedded documents in the MMA. Did you know that the process had been incorporated within the 2015 version of the MMA?
I cannot recall. There was a long list of changes we made to the MMA in 2015. Certainly, I would have asked Celia to incorporate it in there.
Now, can we go to the protocol itself, which can be found at RBK 000-50409 and page 2. And you see there, section 2, site identification, where it says just above the header for section 3, the council will assign a lead officer from the housing department, and they will be invited to join the scheme project group, will act as the main interface between the TMO and the council on the project. Was Roger Keane appointed as that officer?
Yes, in relation to Grenfell, I asked him to attend the project meetings.
And if we turn over the page in this document to page 3, you see roughly halfway down the page the heading Project Monitoring, and the third bullet point says that the protocol required provision of regular highlight reports, risk register, and providing information on project as requested.
Yes.
The penultimate bullet point on that page also provides for specific exception reports will be required where there are significant changes, i.e. changes to the specification, budgets, delays, or new risks arise. Can you remember, was that ever done?
If that's the Hidden Homes one, yes, it was. Is it possible to look at the document?
I don't think it is via this link.
At one point, we had separate reporting for Hidden Homes, and then we combined that with the asset management meetings and reported there. We also had an Excel, I think it was an Excel spreadsheet. It might have been Word, I'm not sure. But we had a highlight report that we were using for Grenfell that was quite detailed and picked up on areas of risk, communication, budget, stages, health and safety, things like that. So I think initially there was a separate Hidden Homes document, and then we developed the highlight report.
And that was developed, and is your evidence that there were bespoke versions for the Grenfell project?
Yes.
Now, if we can go back to your first statement at paragraph 86, and that's at RBK 000-33719/17, and in particular paragraph 86. And you refer there to these reporting requirements we've just considered. You refer to them collectively as risk and exception reporting. Now, did that risk and exception reporting rely on the TMO itself identifying any matters which were unusual or problematic?
Yes, as the technical experience would sit with them, we might pick up on any communications issues. Residents would often email Laura. We'd also pick up on the comms side of things as well. But in terms of the technical information, we would rely on the TMO to complete that and send it to us.
And so did that risk and exception reporting rely on the TMO to then choose to report those matters to RBKC?
Yes.
Now, if we can stay in your first witness statement but go forward to paragraph 91. You say there, and I quote, "In developing the protocol, I didn't want to burden the TMO with multiple reporting obligations when it was also required to report to its own board and other internal structures. To avoid this, we initially suggested that they could pass on their own internal reports to us, but this never really happened consistently or systematically." Who suggested that the TMO could pass on their own internal reports?
I did.
And when?
Oh, it was when we first started to talk about the protocol, because if they were reporting into their exec team or their board, and the report covered the key areas that we wanted to know about, they could be copied to us. In the end, that never happened, and we developed a separate template, which they completed.
So you first raised the prospect of a protocol in September 2012, so it would have been last quarter of 2012 that this was discussed.
I believe so, yes.
What was the TMO's response to this suggestion?
There was an exchange of the protocol between Celia and I think David Burns was there at the time. He raised concerns around the reporting to be too onerous. At the end of the day, David Burns left and the TMO completed those highlight reports for us as requested, and they were discussed at the monthly asset management meetings.
The consistent and systematic provision of those internal reports, it would have given RBKC greater access to a greater range of information, wouldn't it?
Potentially.
When reports were not provided consistently or systematically, did Celia challenge it?
Yes, she would.
She would or she did?
She did.
And did you challenge it?
Yes.
And with whom did you challenge it?
It was specifically, it was around the asset management information where there'd been specific requests for information from the assets team, and that's when Laura and myself met with Peter Madison and Sasha Jevons.
And what was the Madison-Jevons position in response to the challenge?
Again, they were recruiting, there'd been a vacancy. I think another member of staff was going into the role, Alex Bosman, and they had enough resources. Again, I think it was this going to the TMO for all the information just complicated things.
And ultimately, did you just drop the proposal?
The proposal for?
Or the request for the provision of this information?
Well, we used the highlight report, which I was happy with.
Can I now turn on to the monitoring of the Grenfell project itself? And staying in your first statement, could we go to paragraph 132, which is at page 26? And in broad terms, you described there that it became clear that Grenfell had to be treated as an asset management project rather than a regeneration project, and responsibility for the project eventually moved to your team. Who made the decision that responsibility for the project should be transferred to housing commissioning?
I believe it was Laura Johnson.
Can you remember why that decision was made?
Because the regeneration team were focusing on wider scale refurbishments of estates and building new housing. This was seen as a major capital project. It was replacing windows, communal heating systems, that type of thing. So the regeneration team were going to focus more on the Silchester estate, Balby and Trevorton. There was small blocks programme, there's an older persons programme. And as I was monitoring asset management, I would monitor the capital programme, and I would work with Steve Mellor on the HRA business plan, working with the TMO and what the funding priorities were. So I think that was probably the rationale behind that decision.
Do you know why responsibility for monitoring wasn't decided before such a major programme was started?
I think it just kind of evolved. So Jane Trefewy had been involved in those initial discussions. Jane Trefewy had been involved in considering what to do with the receipts from Elm Park Gardens. So Jane, in a regeneration role, took on the initial responsibility for the Grenfell Tower. And then Kitty Mortimer, who was a regen officer, took on the day-to-day development. I think it was just a change in focus for the team.
Could we stay in your first statement but turn over the page and look at paragraph 134, where you say, although there were several capital projects ongoing in the borough and there had been other capital projects with the TMO in the past, Grenfell Tower was the council and the TMO's first major capital spending project. Really, it was the biggest project carried out on the council's housing stock in many years. Would you agree that the combination of the size of the project and the TMO's lack of experience called for particular and close scrutiny of the project by RBKC?
Yes.
What were your priorities and the priorities of your department in exercising oversight over the project?
Roger worked very much on an operational level. He attended the project meetings. As I've said in my statement, I wanted him to be my eyes and ears. He also liaised with Laura Johnson, who is the SRO for Calc. So he looked at the interface between the two sites on that. The asset management meetings were the main forum whereby we scrutinised through the highlight reports. We didn't do things such as site visits. It was mainly through the highlight reports.
And was your concern primarily budget rather than anything else?
No.
What were the principal concerns then?
Delivery within timescales. There was a lot of feedback from residents in terms of communications. We wanted to improve the building for the residents.
Would you agree that delivery within timescale is the flip side of the delivery within budget coin?
Yes.
Now, in his witness statement to the inquiry, Roger Keane dealt with highlight reports and said this at paragraph 63. We don't need to go to it, but I'll read it out to you. The dashboard reports provide project updates and were used for strategic purposes only, although the TMO would sometimes include some more detailed technical information. We were only scrutinising the implications for the council. Is it going to cause delays and is it going to impact the cost? So, bearing in mind what Mr. Keane says there, do you agree with him that the priorities for the council were delays and cost?
They were certainly two concerns, but that wasn't the only priority. We wanted to deliver an improved building for the residents.
Is it fair to say, based on your answers thus far, that the purpose of closely monitoring this project had nothing to do with health and safety concerns?
Not at that point, no.
Did you ever share the contents of the highlight reports with Laura Johnson?
We may have discussed them at our one-to-one meetings. The minutes would have been available. I cannot specifically recall when I shared them with her.
Are you sure that you did?
I cannot recall.
Now, you describe in your statement and again today, Mr. Keane as your eyes and ears on the project. Is it right that Mr. Keane was the most junior member of your team?
Yes.
Did Mr. Keane have any technical expertise or experience that particularly qualified him for the role in relation to Grenfell?
No.
Why did you choose him then?
Because I didn't have anyone with technical experience, and he was a reliable, hard-working member of staff who'd formed good relationships with the TMO. He worked closely with Claire Williams, the project manager, and worked on the interface with Calc.
And he was the individual who wasn't replaced when
Yes.
he took voluntary redundancy?
Yes.
Did you try and identify someone who did have the technical expertise to fill his role in relation to Grenfell after he left?
He left in 2016. The regeneration team was then expanding at that time. That's where the resources were going.
I now want to move on to a separate topic, which is fire risk assessments, and in particular the relationship with Janice Ray. And staying in your first statement, could we turn to paragraph 162, which is at page 33? And you say this, and I quote, "When matters relating to fire safety did cross my desk, the usual path was to contact or coordinate with Janice Ray, Health and Safety Manager at the TMO. There was a lot of confidence within the council in Janice. She was very responsive and you always got a thorough reply from her. Although I note that I had to rely upon the veracity of her responses, I didn't have the expertise to contradict her." Did anyone in the housing department have the expertise or experience to question Janice Ray knowledgeably or, where necessary, to contradict her?
No, the health and safety function had gone to corporate, and all of our technical teams had gone over to the TMO under the capital programme.
And are the reasons you set out in paragraph 162 the same reasons why RBKC had confidence in Janice Ray's abilities?
Janice Ray was an extremely responsive officer. Whenever anything came across my path to do with fire safety, and it didn't that often, or any health and safety matter, Janice would always be very responsive and very clear about the action that she was taking.
Did you ever mention to Laura Johnson the utility of having a health and safety specialist within your team to double check, to verify the robustness, the reasonableness of the advice, the responses given by Janice Ray?
I focused more on my concerns around the capital programme. I should have also included compliance in that.
Could I now turn to your second witness statement in paragraph 15, which is at RBK 000 54464. Paragraph 15, where you say, within the annual reports, there was a section on health and safety which summarised health and safety issues arising from that year and changes made by the TMO in respect of health and safety. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, if we can go to RBK 0002395, which hopefully is a draft version of the TMO performance report for 2016-17. Thank you. And if we could go to page 15, and in particular, paragraph 3.6. And if that could be expanded, we see there the health and safety section of the report. Now, looking at the column on the left-hand side of paragraph 3.6, we can see Janice's name written in red. Do you agree?
Yes.
Were the health and safety elements of the report drafted by Janice Ray?
In conjunction with Celia, yes.
Are you able to give us an idea of the respective contributions of Celia Caliscan and Janice Ray to the health and safety sections?
Celia would rely on Janice for the content.
Entirely?
Celia may be involved through other areas as well, such as the leaseholder fire doors. So she would get involved in specific issues where we needed to work with the TMO. She would be aware of the issues relating to the fire at Adair and Hazelwood.
Would it be fair to say that Celia Caliscan greatly relied upon Janice Ray then, for these purposes?
For this information, yes.
Would you scrutinise the accuracy of the information set out in these reports?
Yes, always.
Given that you lacked the expertise and background to question Janice Ray, would you have involved the health and safety advisor at RBKC to enable you to critique what had been said?
I didn't.
Can you help us as to why not?
I knew that Janice was in close contact or worked closely with that part of the sector. It's certainly something that I could have done in hindsight.
Did anyone in the housing department ever raise a doubt about the robustness or reasonableness of the advice, the information given by Janice Ray?
No.
Did Laura Johnson ever express
No.
any doubts in that regard?
No.
Is it right or fair to say that the TMO performance reports contained no independent or verified information about the TMO's health and safety and fire safety performance?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, could we look at an example of the interaction between your team and Janice Ray and go to RBK 000 46464, which is an email chain between you, Celia Caliscan, and Janice Ray on the 26th of August 2016. The subject in the header is fire safety, and the chain begins with an email in the middle of page 3. That email is from the Greater London Authority regarding the Shepherd's Court fire, which had happened, I think, on the 19th of August of that year. And the correspondent from the GLA, Maya Luna Jorgensen, asks in the final sentence, could you let me know what RBKC's fire safety policy is for tower blocks, how the council reviews this, and when it was last updated? Now, this email is then sent to Celia and then on to Janice Ray, and Janice Ray then drafts a response, which, if we go back to page 1 of this chain, we can see that the response starts at the bottom of page 1 and goes on to page 2 as well. And then Celia Caliscan then says at the top of the first page, there we go, yes, this is very detailed, so please do send. And then you are then copied into the email at the very top at 0938. Now, would you agree that the impression arising out of this brief email chain is that Celia neither had the requisite knowledge or expertise to answer Ms Jorgensen's email
Yes.
or to question the substance or accuracy of Ms Ray's response?
Yes.
Was that level of scrutiny typical of that applied by Celia Chaliscan to correspondence from Janice Ray?
We relied on Janice as the expert in the field for that type of information, yes.
Could we now go to RBK 000 48400? And this is an email chain between you, Celia, Janice Ray and Laura Johnson, starting on the 20th and ending on the 26th of April 2017. And if we go to page 3, we can see there in the bottom part of the page, Celia Chaliscan asked Janice Ray for a short report on the fire at Trellick Tower. Following a request from Councillor Mackover, Janice Ray sent this report to you on the 25th of April, which we can see at the email at the bottom of the first page of this chain. Which you then forwarded to Laura Johnson, which is slightly further up, page 1, with the words, Laura, Janice has completed this report for scrutiny. I will format into our style and Asha will circulate when she is back. Again, is it right that you asked no questions of Janice Ray about the substance of this report?
I would need to go to Janice as the person who was operational on the ground for the information on the fire. I had no reason to be concerned around her report of the fire.
And so your department's role was limited to formatting and other such issues?
We would read it and ask any questions, but I would rely on Janice for the subject matter expert information about what happened.
Would you accept that this email chain does not indicate that either you or Celia Chaliscan asked any questions regarding the substance of the report given to you?
According to this email chain, yes, there would have been other conversations, though, that were verbal.
You say would have been. Were there any conversations in which you questioned the accuracy of anything Janice Ray had said?
I didn't have any reason to question the inaccuracy of the Trellick fire.
Now, Councillor Rock Fielding Mellon refers in his first statement to the filter role that the Housing Department played. And if we can go to his statement, which is at RBK 000 33403, page 18 and paragraph 68. And he essentially says here that he understood the Housing Department to operate as, quote, effectively an independent check on what the TMO said, which monitored the performance of the TMO against the MMA. These reports and reassurances combined to provide us with the reasonable impression that fire safety measures within Grenfell Tower and more widely across the entire HRA portfolio were being appropriately managed by the TMO, which had contracted with independent fire consultants, which had regular meetings with the LFB. Would you agree with the accuracy of Councillor Fielding Mellon's characterisation of the Housing Department as a filter?
Yes, we would be a conduit for information.
Would it be fair to say, on the basis of the evidence you've given this afternoon, that the level of scrutiny brought to bear by your department was at best limited?
In terms of technical aspects of the contract, yes. By that I mean compliance, asset management.
And particularly in relation to FRAs?
Yes.
Sir, it is 4:25.
Yes.
I'm about to turn to a new topic which I will not be able to complete in 5 minutes, or 4 minutes now. So
it might be better to start it
on Monday morning.
Monday morning, yes. I'm sure Miss Johnson would like to know how much longer you expect to require with her.
Miss Johnson will certainly be free at Monday lunchtime, I hope in good time before then.
Right. Well, I expect you were warned that we might need to ask you to come back on
Yes.
Monday, were you?
Yes.
Yes, well, I'm glad it's not coming as a surprise.
No.
Well, we're going to stop there for the afternoon. We shall have to ask you to come back on Monday to answer some more questions, but as you've heard, it should only be for the morning, so not too bad.
Yeah.
All right. So 10 o'clock on Monday, please. And remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it over the weekend.
Okay.
All right? Thank you very much. Would you like to give the usher, please? Thank you, Mr. Kinnear.
Thanks,
10
sir.
o'clock on Monday.
Thanks, sir.
Good. Thank you.